Respected Dharma Master, fellow practitioners and guests, Amitabha. We read in the sutras how one year a conflict arose between two monks. It was a relatively small event that triggered it, but gradually it split them and their fellow monks into two main groups. A smaller third group watched what was happening, but did not take sides. Members of each group were convinced that they were right and the other group was wrong. As the situation worsened, the two groups even began to practice separately. Growing increasingly concerned with the group conflict, some of the monks who had not taken sides went to the Buddha, who was nearby, and told him what was happening. He spoke to both groups and encouraged them to resume practicing harmoniously, to not be attached to their own viewpoints, and to try to understand those of others. But the situation continued to deteriorate. The Buddha was again asked to please try to reconcile the two opposing groups of monks. He went to the monastery and for a second time spoke of the need for peace and unity within the Buddhist community. One monk stood up and requested the Buddha to please return to his meditation, saying that they would resolve the situation themselves. Once more, the Buddha asked the monks to stop fighting and to return to harmony. The same monk repeated what he had said, and in so doing rejected the Buddha's guidance. The Buddha then told the monks about a series of events that had taken place a long time ago. King Brahmadatta ruled a large kingdom and commanded a strong army. King Dijiti, who ruled a smaller kingdom, had heard that Brahmadatta was about to invade his kingdom. Knowing he could never defeat King Brahmadatta's army, and that many of his soldiers would lose their lives in a futile battle, King Dijiti felt it would be best if he and his queen fled. So they left and went into hiding in another city. A short time later, the queen gave birth to Prince Dagava. After the prince was older, King Dijiti began to fear what would happen if King Brahmadatta found all three of them together. As a result, arrangements were made for the prince to live elsewhere. One day, the king and queen were recognized, captured, and taken to be executed. By chance, Prince Dagava was on his way to see his parents, whom he had not seen in a long time. He was about to rush to them when his father cried out, "Do not, my dear Dagava, be far-sighted. Do not be nearsighted. For vengeance is not settled through vengeance. Vengeance is settled through non-vengeance." The king repeated his warning 2 more times, adding that he was not deranged and that those with heart would understand. None of the villagers knew who Dagavo was or what the king was talking about. Heeding his father's warning, Dagavo managed to restrain himself. He watched his parents being executed and dismembered. That night, he bought wine and gave it to the guards, who soon became drunk. He then made a funeral pyre, gathered his parents' remains, placed them on the pyre, and set fire to it. After paying his final respects to his parents, he went into the forest to mourn their loss, to mourn their death. A while later, after coming out of hiding, Dagavo managed to obtain a job as an apprentice in an elephant stable next to the palace. When King Brahmadatta heard Dagavo singing and playing a lute, he was moved by the sound and arranged for Dagavo to go to work in the palace. Serving the king and always trying to please him, Dagavo gradually won the king's trust. One day, while King Brahmadatta was out hunting, Dagavo, who was driving the king's chariot, deliberately drove it away from the rest of the hunting party. Not long after, the king said he wished to take a nap, and using Dagavo's lap as a pillow, he went to sleep. Dagavo's moment of revenge had come. He took out his sword, but suddenly his father's words came back to him, and he put his sword away. A second time, he drew and then sheathed his sword. After Dagavo had drawn his sword for the third time, his father's words, simple and gentle, hit home. They touched Dagavo's sorrowing heart that was full of hatred and consumed by the desire for revenge. His heart knew the truth of his father's words and understood their import. Heeding his father's words, Dagavo awakened at last to the compassion and wisdom in that self-same heart. He was able to put away not only his sword, but his hatred and his desire for vengeance as well. Suddenly, the king awoke in great alarm. He told Dagavo that he had dreamed that Prince Dagavo was about to kill him. Instinctively, Dagavo drew his sword yet again and announced that he was Prince Dagavo. The king then begged Dagavo not to kill him. With his hatred and vengeance having been overwhelmed by his compassion and wisdom, Dagavo was able to put away his sword and in turn begged the king's forgiveness. The king and the prince spared each other's lives, and each vowed never to harm the other. They then returned to the castle. Once there, the king asked his ministers what they would do if they found Prince Dagavo. After hearing their brutal descriptions of what they would do, the king told them of what had just transpired. He then turned to Dagavo and asked the meaning of his father's last words. Dagavo explained that "do not be far-sighted" meant that one should not hold on to a wish for retaliation for a long time. "Do not be nearsighted" meant one should not readily break one's friendship with another. For vengeance is not settled through vengeance. Vengeance is settled through non-vengeance, enabled Dagavo to realize that if he sought revenge for the deaths of his parents by killing the king's supporters would retaliate by killing him. Then Dagavo's supporters would in turn kill the king's supporters. This is why vengeance never ends through vengeance. In sparing each other's lives, both the king and the prince ended vengeance by letting go of it. Dagavo's father had first told Dagavo, "Do not be far-sighted," which meant not to hold on to the wish for vengeance. Previously, we learned how the Buddha had told the monastics on several occasions that they should always train themselves as follows. Our minds will be unaffected, and we will say no evil words. We will remain sympathetic to that other person's welfare with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. We will keep pervading him with an awareness imbued with goodwill. And beginning with him, we will keep pervading the all-encompassing world with an awareness imbued with goodwill. Abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. If we give in to anger, our mind will be shaken and moved from its naturally clear, tranquil state. If we hold on to our wish for vengeance, we harbor evil words as well as a mind of hatred and bitterness. Then this mind will have no room for empathy or goodwill. If anyone had a right to feel hatred and fear, surely it was King Dajiti. And yet, in a truly terrifying situation, his overriding thought was to protect his son. He did not cry out for his son to save him and his queen, or for Dagavo to save his own life by fleeing, but instead spoke to his son's heart and told him not to come forward. He then warned Dagavo not to hold on to resentment, not to readily destroy a friendship, and not to seek revenge. The king had the presence of mind to know in an instant just the precise words to strike the right chord in the heart of his son, whom he had not seen for several years. Imagine the level of restraint required to focus the mind and eliminate fear to be able to speak wisely out of love and empathy instead of anger and fear. Imagine the dignity it took to remain calm. How many of us today have even a fraction of such restraint and dignity? Forget about these virtues in the face of a horrific experience. How often do we practice restraint in our daily lives? How dignified are we in our demeanor and behavior? Behind me is the image of a Buddha, an awakened being. What qualities does this image bring to mind? Restraint and dignity, patience and compassion, contentment and great ease. These are the qualities we need to uncover within ourselves if we are to, like him, awaken. But our lives today are so frantic. We have so much to do. We rush from one task to another. In the United States, we even have a term for it, multitasking. As we are talking on our mobile phones while eating our lunch and following the spoken directions from our satellite navigation systems as we drive to our next appointment. With all this going on, we must be very important people. It is so easy to be seduced by current ideas of what a successful person is. We have seriously strayed from our inner virtues. We practice little restraint. We exhibit little dignity. We are hurting ourselves. And even worse, we are causing great harm to our children. We are setting them on a path that will lead them even farther away from their innate goodness and virtues. Instead of passing on our bad habits of self-indulgence and instant gratification to our children, we need to teach them what is important in life, how to become truly contented and caring people. Contented, caring people have no room for craving or hatred in their hearts. Such people have no room for thoughts of retaliation in their minds. Such people are worthy of the respect and trust of others. Such people are at ease with life. And when sad or even terrible things happen, they are not overcome by fear or sorrow. They are able to control their fear and transform it into love. They know the futility of doing otherwise. They know the great harm they can do to those they love more than life itself. Contented and caring people are able to think not what they themselves want, but what others need. Placing those needs above personal desires, such virtuous people are able to think and react with restraint and dignity. They are able to give wisely to others what will truly benefit them. In the account of Dagavo, his father, the king, had given his son two wonderful gifts: insight and life itself. Through his words and his actions, with dignity and restraint, he was able to send his son a powerful message that enabled him to overcome the desire for revenge. The king taught Dagavo that one should not hold on to, but should let go of bitterness and hatred. Fortunately, most of us are not faced with such horrific experiences. Yes, we have arguments with family members and friends, and we often find ourselves having to interact with people we do not like. But as disagreeable as these occurrences are, they are certainly not life-threatening. And yet, when we encounter frustrating or trying situations, how many of us are able to remain calm and to respond with wisdom? How many of us have instead complained to all who would listen or grumbled to ourselves? How often have our minds been shaken from their clear, tranquil state? How often do we use evil words that are harsh or false? How often do we hold on to our anger and then nurture that anger with our thoughts? As Dagavo's father said, do not hold on to the wish for revenge. We can choose to wrap ourselves in our resentment and bitterness, and in so doing, reject peace and happiness. The results of this type of reaction can be viewed daily in the newspapers and on the news on television. Or we can choose to broaden the scope of our compassion and wish for an end to the suffering of all beings. We can choose to create peace within ourselves, and in this way, bring peace to others. Next, the king told his son, do not be nearsighted, which meant not to readily break a friendship. The about-to-be executed king had wanted his son to understand the value of friendship and trust. To have friendship with others, we need to have trust in others and to be trustworthy ourselves. Realizing that Dagavo was about to kill him, King Brahmadatta knelt down and begged Dagavo to spare his life. We could say that since Dagavo was about to kill the king, this was more likely an act of fear and bitterness. an act of desperation, not one of trust. In our trust, we need to be sincere. It was the prince's sincerity that so moved the king. So often, when we do something, we do so with hesitation and doubt. This doubt may well prevent us from doing what we know to be right. Or our motives for doing something may well be selfish. Dagavu's were not. He wanted to honor his father's words and not carry hatred and bitterness in his heart. His wish to do so was so strong that he was willing to sacrifice his own life to let go of hatred and the wish for revenge. This was not easy for him to do. He had to struggle with himself. He pulled out his sword 3 times to kill the king. But in his heart, he knew the truth of his father's words. And in the end, he was able to lay aside his wish for revenge to comply with those words and to put away his sword. So often, we act out of self-interest, unwilling even to sacrifice our pride, much less our lives. In our struggle with our conscience, we have doubts. And like Dagavu, we also hesitate. Thoughts that we are right and that we know what will make us happy and bring us what we desire keep bubbling up from inside us. Unlike Dagavu, in the really important matters, we so often fall short of acting on what we sense to be right. We do so not because we are bad people. We do so because we are careless and because we have gotten into the habit of giving ourselves excuses not to do what is right. We tell ourselves that we deserve to feel the way that we do. And so, with hesitation and doubt, we may not do what we know we should. And even if we do what we know to be right, the hesitation is still there. And this hesitation will be apparent to all those around us. But if we can completely overcome this negative, selfish inclination and wholeheartedly do what we know to be right, our sincerity will shine through. And thus, if we are sincere, truly sincere, we will touch others. And if we trust others with such palpable sincerity that they are able to feel it, then we are